From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined, as always, with our guest producer, Max Freight Train Williams. Most importantly, you are here, and that makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. Folks, it's been a stressful time. We don't want to jinx anybody, but odds are, hopefully we all make it to 2023 as it's reckoned in these our current days. We wanted to wish you, all our fellow conspiracy realists, happy holidays. You know, for many spiritually minded people, this is a tremendously important time. For many more secular people, this is still a very important time. You know, we're right to the finish line. We're closing in on the home stretch of the marathon of plot twist that was 2022. So today we thought we would, as we get closer to wrapping up, we thought we would explore something a little different in honor of our guest producer, Max, maybe a little bit of ridiculous history here. Can you steal time from other people?
Yes.
Are we talking the countless meetings that we have to go to?
That's number one with a bullet.
Or what about like wage theft?
That's another one. Yeah. Also a bullet with that one. I think we could also say stealing time. Oh, who was it? Notorious womanizer who also dabbled in physics. Albert Einstein once famously said, all you need to, you can prove time is relative. Consider an hour spent at a meeting versus an hour with a beautiful woman. I'm paraphrasing, but he did say something like that. The questions, okay. Aside from allocation time, wage theft, meetings that could have been emails, could you actually take some piece of the natural span of a person's time alive? This sounds like maybe a question for science fiction authors. It's very Ray Bradbury, or maybe a quantum physicist. But so we're going to find today, these questions are way older than a lot of people might assume. And they go back to something that I think we all love it on this show. Something that seems normal for absolutely no reason. Here are the facts. We're talking about calendars. We all just accept it, right?
We do. Because you grow up with it, you know what day it is. It's one of the most grounding things for your brain. I know what day it is. And then the next one that comes after that is I know what time it is. And a lot of our exploration today comes directly from our conversations about the moon, right? When we were looking at the moon and the calendars and how do people decide what day it is and where we are in time? And mostly over the history of time, it's been through looking up and figuring out where the Earth is and where the moon is and where the sun is.
In relation to other things, right? And then just to really quick, because we are in the holiday season, we also have lovely Advent calendars, really countdown calendars that gives you a delightful piece of chocolate every day leading up to Christmas. And apparently Advent calendars are becoming quite a thing, counting down other things like your birthday or some other, a special day. But yeah, exactly. And it wasn't just any old folks that were looking up into the heavens and saying, oh, things are moving, let's call this time, and then track, the movement thereof. It was folks dating back as far as the Gregorians, because they, I believe, invented one of the very first calendars.
Yeah. Even before then, the oldest mathematical device in known human history are these very clever notched sticks, and they were all about calculating time, calculating the passage of the moon, creating what would become the lunar calendar, which so many religious schools of thought use today. The Gregorian calendar, you nailed it, is the one that the majority of the world uses. It's the it's the business calendar of the world. So, it quite literally is like, so let's say you grow up in Qatar or Saudi Arabia, right? Or you're in a Muslim community in Thailand, then you probably are going to use the Islamic calendar for a lot of stuff. But then when it comes to communicating at your job, other stuff like that, communicating internationally, you're using the Gregorian calendar. And you might be talking to someone who in their personal life, maybe they practice Judaism and they use a different calendar for more of their personal life. So this is a civic calendar. It's a world civic calendar, the way that for quite a while now, English has been considered the de facto business language of the world. But pretty much everybody uses the Gregorian calendar now, not because it's perfect, which it's not because it's convenient, which it's not, just because it keeps things uniform. And we owe all of that. The reason we're saying we're recording Friday, December 9th, 2022, is all thanks to a guy named Greg, Pope Gregory the 13th. He's the dude who introduced this way back in 1582,
well, Ben, he's at least the guy that said, this is what it is now.
Oh, yeah. No, you're right. You're right. No, credit where it's due to Greg's team because they were doing the real work. I hate it when people do that. So shout out to all our fellow conspiracy realists who are leap year babies because you are living evidence about how imperfect this calendar is. But still, not to dunk on it too hard. We haven't invented a calendar here on stuff they don't want you to know yet. So you can say, despite its warts and its wrinkles, the Gregorian calendar allows us to anticipate and predict events with a fair amount of consistency.
I propose a calendar with a 3-day work week. Vote for me.
I propose a post-work economy.
There you go.
Star Trek. Max, I know you're not on camera now, but I hope I earned a fist pump with that one.
Is this a Ben Bucks based economy?
This is the idea. It's utopian in concept. The idea is that eventually, and we've talked about this in the past, eventually human technology could arrive at some point where civilization eliminates the problem of scarcity, right? And really, as left-wing as it sounds to some people, it's objectively true. The resources of the world, as we record, are adequate enough to give the entirety of the 8 billion something people on the planet a pretty good quality of life. It's all logistics, tradition. I don't know. Tradition's a problem, right? We've been doing the Gregorian calendar. We've been going hard on the paint with this as a planet, not since 1582, which is part of where our story begins, right? In Fair Verona. But we're hitting something really interesting here. 1582, in the span of human history, not too long ago. So people haven't always been using the Gregorian calendar, and that's part of the pickle. Why? Why did Greg wake up one day and just find himself in a mood? Was he mad that it was Wednesday or something?
No, old Greg, who loves his Baileys, by the way. I hope one of you gets that. Okay, yep. Old Greg was trying to fix a problem because the calendars that were in use at the time were doing some weird things. Mostly, they were moving the actual date that's supposed to represent certain seasons, certain times. It was moving further and further away from the actual seasons that were supposed to be represented because there were extra days.
Yeah, time, as humans understood it, was drifting. This is nuts. This is crazy incorrect. And it's one of those small mistakes that expands, it ripples, right? And so now all of a sudden, a lot of people who are defining their lives through the passage of time via these milestones, typically of religious celebrations, they're saying, hey, this is not happening when it's supposed to. The equinox is all screwy now. Why is this? It's due to the calendar they were using, the Julian calendar, named in a burst of humility after Julius Caesar, who back in the days of the Roman Empire, like 45 BCE or so, said,
if it's real, if even the Roman Empire existed.
If it really existed, or if it was all the Russian horde. Yeah. He says he does make a declaration. He does wake up one day and say, no, this is what we're doing. The math, like him, like most rulers, he took a lot of credit for stuff that wasn't his idea. No ding on the mathematicians and astronomers who helped actually build the thing. They were very smart. They were working with what they had. But just like you described, Matt, they incorrectly assumed the average solar year. They said 365 and 1/4 days. That's fine.
Yeah, but that 1/4 was off.
For the first century, it was fine, to be clear.
Yeah.
For the first, while those people were alive, they nailed it. Home run. And it wasn't until centuries later people were thinking, oh no. So Caesar made the Julian calendar via an edict. An edict is, the best way to think about it if you're from the US, is it's like an executive order on steroids.
For sure.
You can kill people if they don't do the edict.
It's like a proclamation, it shall be so.
Yes. Yeah, just so. And that's why for more than 1,600 years, this was the main calendar of the Roman Empire, which was so hot back in the day. And then when the Roman Empire fell in around the 5th century, people still went with it because it was tradition. It was normalized, even if you knew it was imperfect. And we have to remember there was no concept of something like a global year, no concept of something like a Greenwich Mean Time. In fact, the idea guessing of what the guessing of what hour it was could vary within as little as 10 miles town to town. There weren't even clocks that would function to that level of sophistication.
We did do a ridiculous history about something along these lines about how it was the train systems that caused standardization of time, between towns, because otherwise they couldn't reliably depend on when things would arrive or know when to expect things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that was a solid episode, and it's indicative of this larger problem. So if we fast forward, okay, Roman Empire's done. Julius Caesar had a heck of a time while he was walking around, but it didn't end well for him. And now that the Roman Empire is gone, it's divided and, it balkanizes basically. Then what we see is that the new year, day one, whatever you want to call the thing, starts to gradually sneak around. It's moving to and fro. It's starting to coincide with Christian festivals because they're the dominant religion of that region at the time, right? Sorry, Zeus, sorry, Odin, etc. Good hustle. And then Christmas Day, for quite a while, was the beginning of the new year for many countries. So not January 1st, that's pagan stuff. That's nonsensical as far as these folks are concerned. The day Jesus Christ is born is the day you start the year with, in their mind, which makes sense. But that's only the first problem, right? We've already got this drift, and it's not scientifically based anymore. It's politically and spiritually based.
Right, because the day Christmas falls on this calendar was kind of a remixed pagan holiday anyway, right?
Just so, yeah, 100%. And then, Matt, so you described this first problem, but that's not the whole bag here. What's the second problem?
Oh, yeah. So the second problem is related to the first problem, and it's what we talked about already. So with that calculation of 365.25 days, there's a leap year every 4 years, according to the Julian calendar. And the actual number of average days in a solar year is 365.24 something, 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 something. And as that date is going off, the date of the spring equinox is starting to drift. And it's really important because that spring equinox date is matched up, or supposed to be matched up, to calculate Easter. And again, we're talking about how important this is in the religious power structures. The fact that Easter seems to not be occurring on Easter anymore is a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The whole concept, time, again, it's drifting. And the human system of accounting for the passage of days is no longer in sync with the natural passage of time, right? The stuff that would happen whether or not humans were around to see it. This reminds me of, okay, so you guys remember the recent kerfuffle about daylight savings time?
The recent, I mean, I've always felt pretty kerfuffly to me. I think people kind of are annoyed by it. What is there a specific thing that happened recently?
It's on the way out.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah, that's.
I didn't know that. That's the best news I've heard all day.
Yeah. This year, at least in the United States, I think it was in March, the Senate said daylight savings time will be permanent, is how they phrase it, in 2023. So you just don't have to move your clock anymore. But the time zone thing has always been a weird conversation for a lot of people. And a similar example, a more recent example of the problem with the calendar would be in time zones, especially in the country of China. China is huge. It has one time zone. It's set to Beijing. That makes stuff super trippy if you live out west, because you still have to pretend that it's 10 a.m. You know what I mean? When it's the middle of the night for you.
Oh, yeah. There's a really interesting thing that happens with seasons as well that I think is matched up to this. The perception, I don't know if you guys feel this, the perception that the seasons are moving, like, or shifting a little bit, like it's winter later into the year now, or it's warmer earlier and that kind of thing, where it feels as though that's happening. And it becomes a very difficult thing to grapple with, because in my mind at least, I'm thinking about this and the calendar shift, or just the drift that occurs no matter which calendar you're using, and the, potential effects of global climate change, and like, where do those two things meet? And I wonder if there was ever anything that was happening in the past where climate was maybe shifting a little bit at the same time that the calendar was shifting, and everybody was just like, what day is it?
Yeah. Where it feels like we're all Robin Williams in Jumanji sometimes, just bursting out into the modern world with no way to contrast things from the previous day. So this makes sense. Like, if you are Pope Greg, this makes sense. This is a good idea. And the original reform there actually messed with time. What Greg and his crew did was say, all right, Thursday, October 4th, 1582, we'll do that as normal. And tomorrow, it's going to be Friday, October 15th. Everybody's good with that, right? And everybody said, yeah, I mean, you're the Pope. Don't torture me.
Well, these are the people that the Pope had influence over, right?
Right. Catholic countries whose rulers were not in conflict with Greg at the time. That's a really good point. So that's the issue. You can't, like everything back then, you can't make these changes overnight. The word about the change travels at the speed of a horse or a ship, or someone literally running as fast as they can through the woods. Maybe a messenger crow. That would be cool.
Yeah. Send a raven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what we're saying is it's a slow process. Initially, Catholic countries in Europe, they went aboard with this, of course, because the Pope said, and their overseas possessions or territories also got word out that that was the new calendar. So imagine you're an overseas possession in the 1500s. Some guy shows up on a boat and says, okay, everybody, what day do you think it is? Wrong. It's Tuesday now.
It's so crazy. It would have to be a declaration to whatever entity was in charge of that area, right? I'm going to go find the Thane, right? Or the Jarl. And sorry, I'm playing way too much Skyrim.
Same.
I'm going to go find the town, the person who runs this town, and tell them quietly, listen, I have something from the Pope. Yeah, it's very important. This is going to get tricky. Going to need you to convince all these people it's a different day now.
Mm-hmm. You got this, right? I got to go back to the peppercorn trade, right?
There's like 7 or 8 more townships I need to inform.
Right. And then get out of town before someone tries to burn me at the stake. Yeah, and this is the thing. So people start calling this the improved calendar, and it takes about 300 years for Protestant and Eastern Orthodox countries to start moving to this. I was not aware of this. Greece, the modern country of Greece, was the last country in Europe to adopt the Gregorian calendar for civil purposes. They didn't do it until 1923.
Wow. It really does make me wonder what that switchover was like. You just got to imagine a lot of people would just be fed up and upset about the concept. Like, what the heck? Who's this guy? To whoever is in charge. Who's this guy to say what day it is? I mean, there'd be anger, I think, or at least frustration.
Oh, sure. Can you imagine in the age of ubiquitous information where everybody seems to be looking for something to have a conflict about? It would. I don't know if it would fly. It'd be a war. It'd be a calendar war.
Think about all the moms whose kids' birthdays fall within those dates that disappeared.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. And all right. So yeah, and same as it ever was, right? Same as it ever was back when this switch happens from Julian to Gregorian. People over the next few centuries start trying to be as specific as they can. They know not everybody's on board. So you'll see when they're dating stuff in manuscripts, they'll use both dates and they'll call one the old style and one the new style. And it was controversial as more communities adopted it. In fact, according to one popular legend, a lot of people saw this as a conspiracy, a papist, possibly Antichrist related cabal of people working in secret. They thought, especially in 1752, that the powers that be were literally, physically robbing them of time, taking days away from their lives, just like a vampire sucking blood.
I love it because the implication there is that time is finite and that it is something that can be robbed as a resource, not just rerouted, or described differently. I think we're going to get into all of this in just a bit.
Yes, and perhaps before we do, we should take some time for a word from our sponsors. Here's where it gets crazy. Okay, so that was a lot about calendars. I think the three of us just think it's weird. It's weird that everybody accepts it, right? Like how future historians will look back on neckties and say, why were they doing that?
Not to mention, fashion-y calendars, the idea of having a dog wearing a suit, or something more risque, like a beefcake calendar with sexy men dressed up in fire outfits or whatever it might be. Where did that come from? That's a story for another day. But yeah, calendars as a concept and as physical objects. Very true, Ben. Down the way, in a more sufficiently developed civilization, I think people might look at them very oddly.
Yeah. I mean, and they were looking at them oddly back in the 1700s. This conspiracy begins in Britain's House of Lords. And shout out to guest producer Max for asking us about a stuff they want you to know beefcake calendar. My P90X is going pretty crazy, so I should be ready.
Is that a euphemism? Your
P90X? It's a exercise thing I'm doing. I don't know if I'm going to keep with it. It's high intensity.
I thought it was a military spy plane or a euphemism for like a
cyber
else.
Penis.
Correct. Thank you. You said what everyone else is thinking.
So Britain's House of Lords, the high muckety mucks there, they knew there was a problem because they hadn't adopted the Gregorian calendar, and it had been more than a century. On their side of the English Channel, the date was February 25th, 1750, but for the rest of Europe, most of the rest of Europe, it was already 1751. They were streets behind, you know?
But unless you think that's a full calendar year that they're behind, it's just, I don't know. I guess it's just the date that is decided to be the first of the year, right?
Yes. Yeah, just so. Yeah. And Britain had a bad taste in its mouth about Catholicism in general. So, for instance, if it doesn't really matter what kind of ideas the Catholic Church may have proposed, if Britain's leaders knew it was coming from the Catholic Church, they would be incredibly skeptical from the jump. Because they were a Protestant land, they had never followed Greg's idea. And it had been 169 years. The House of Lords, thanks in large part to a guy named Lord Chesterfield, they said, okay, let's put this difference aside, you know, just for a second, and we're going to convert to the new style of calendars. And businesses in this area had already been doing that old style, new style thing, just so they could work with other businesses like across the channel and for trade and so on. But they faced the same problem old Greg faced. They had to get past that discrepancy. Matt, they had to figure out when the new year was. They had to figure out which days go where. And because they were, you know, somewhat arrogant, very well-to-do British dudes, they just decided to pick something and go with it. There was no.
Isn't Chesterfield the cat that invented cigarettes, basically?
I don't know.
That's
no.
cool.
There's Chesterfields. This is certainly like a fancy brand of tobacco product.
Oh,
that I
for
believe
sure.
was named after this gentleman.
His real name, Philip Dormer Stanhope, but they call him the Earl. I'm not sure on his affiliation with tobacco, but as we'll see, he was also known for being really funny.
So wrong. It was named after a county in Virginia.
Well, that county in Virginia might have been named after him.
True. Very true.
So there we go. We got there. So let's go back to this New Year idea. So New Year's was occurring on March 25th in Britain, and they would have to make a switch. This would affect all sorts of stuff, you know, not just birthdays, not just holidays. This would affect business contracts. This would affect when people get paid. It's a domino effect as well, because a calendar builds on itself. So they had a lot to consider. And after they considered all this, Sky Lord Chesterfield, he's running point on this bill in the House of Lords. And they said, here's what we're going to do. We're just going to skip 11 days. We're going to find 11 days in a row, and we're going to say those days. And so they said, all right, September 2nd, 1752. Going to do that day as normal. And the next day is going to be September 14th, 1752. Everybody's cool, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a little time warp action, you know, for posterity.
Yeah, let's do the time warp for 11 days. So problem is that the House of Lords, like any legislative congressional body, kind of thrives on cliques and debate and disagreement. So the Tory party, which is way more conservative, and do keep in mind, folks, conservative for the 1700s, they say this is a terrible idea. They're mad about that New Year's thing you were talking about, Matt. They said they were like, okay, they have valid points. It was going to mess up a lot of stuff for the average person in the economy, but they were also kind of leaning into this sort of war on Christmas, like culture war sort of thing. And they had these protests, and their banner was this: give us our 11 days back. People liked it. People like the slogan.
Who hath absconded with mine 11 days?
Exactly.
Return them to me post haste and forthwith.
And the Whig Party, their political opponents, tried to have their own PR, their own marketing spin, but it was much less catchy. It was kind of toothless. I feel like I'm biasing us all against it, but it was The new style, the true style. Womp womp.
It's the choice of a new generation.
Yeah.
It's like new Coke, That went over super well, too.
I think people like also the new style, the true style. It didn't have an exclamation point. I don't know why that matters to me more in political slogans, but give us our 11 days back is sort of this like the crowd goes with you. People shake their fist and they go, yeah, verily.
Speaking of weak and misplaced slogans, I don't know if you guys saw this, but around Atlanta, where we just had an election, there were these signs that at first I thought were some sort of snarky, nihilistic admonition of democracy. And it just said, democracy is an act. Which to me makes me think like democracy is a fraud, it's a phony, it's an act. But then it says early voting begins on blah, 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 blah. Like democracy is an action, like, voting. But man, sometimes things can read very poorly if you don't give them the thought they deserve.
Yeah, agreed. And this is where we find some crazy stuff going on. As the story goes, many average residents of Britain agreed with the Tory party, the more conservative party. According to the story, tons of people got together. They formed throngs of furious mobs and went through a series of riots across England on the night of September 2nd. You will not take our 11 days in this papist plot. Papist being, the rude word for Catholics that like Catholic conspiracy theorists would use. And not to say that the Catholic Church hasn't been at the heart of a bunch of very real, very proven conspiracies.
No question. I just have to say, I love the idea of time riots. Sounds very futuristic.
Oh, that does. That would be a great 80s, 90s movie.
Yeah.
Bring Van Damme back. Bring Time Cop back for the time riots.
Yeah, he's got to like sort out those time rioters.
Well, it's weird because you already kind of mentioned it, Noel. There are only two publications that we even know about any of this from. And according to them, these riots had a lot to do, or at least in some large part, had to do with that concept of stealing wages, right? Time equals money. You're taking my potential wages away from me, right?
Yeah. And they felt the government had been compromised. That feeling in general is something that a lot of people can agree with in the modern day, regardless of who your government is now, unless it's Singapore. So they said this was either demonic anti-Christian stuff, or at the very least, they're trying to swindle the working class out of much needed wages. This would be almost 2 weeks worth of income. And this had heavy implications for daily life. All the festivals you love have drifted through time by more than a week. The saints' days as well. And hey, on a personal level, what about your birthday? What about your romantic partner's birthday? Huh? What if her or his birthday was on like September 5th? What are you supposed to do?
But like, is this much ado about nothing? I mean, are they really robbing people's wages? Aren't they just resetting things and just kind of standardizing? There's no actual time being cut out. It's not like you take a pay cut for that gap, right? The week just resets. I'm asking. I'm wondering.
If you work, right, an hourly shift or something, and every day you get paid a certain amount. If 11 days are wiped off the calendar, that's 11 days worth of wages that you won't make that year. Right?
Over that calendar year.
Over the calendar year.
For this, okay, because this reset requires a little snip, and then it resets, and then you're back to normal, but it takes a full year.
Well, because the calendar, remember, is the business calendar, which represents are you paying, what kind of payment are you making on your house, or on whatever other things that you owe lenders. It's a little weird.
Delivery contracts consider being in the agricultural industry, right?
So did they just not consider these things, or did they just not care because they're in such a bubble and they don't think about the working class?
They did consider them, and they had, a series of band-aids that have repercussions that continue today. Without getting into the weeds too much, one of the big problems they were confronted with, just like Pope Greg, was that the majority of the population was functionally illiterate, possessing the power of literacy, which is an amazing power, was at this time kind of like being able to work with a very specific highfalutin kind of code, a programming language. A lot of people just couldn't do it, right? They were not presented with the opportunities. I'm sorry. Most people are brilliant. If they were given the opportunity to acquire literacy, they would. But now it's a problem that's so niche to the Pope 170 years ago, so niche to the House of Lords, that trying to explain it to the public is already a huge obstacle. So many people did, as far as we can guess, literally think the government was physically taking 11 days from their lives, sending them almost 2 weeks too early to their graves. But, eventually, the thing about this story is it's really light on how those riots panned out. We are left to conclude that order prevailed. The riots were squashed. Those in power gave some like Band-Aid solutions. And as always, the working class figured it out for themselves. Fast forward a few more centuries and boom, everybody's on the same calendar, Friday, December 9th, 2022. If, that is, those riots ever happened at all.
Well, I don't know. Did they?
Right. Are we dealing with some revisionist history here? Is this more in the realm of lore and legend than actual facts?
That's right. This is weird. I have to ask, had you guys ever heard of this story before we started like digging into
the time riots?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. My grandmama used to tell me about it whilst sitting atop her knee at night times.
Yes. Yeah. Back when knees were made legal again.
Right? Correct.
After the knee riots.
Yes. Yes.
One time when I was at one of these big gas stations, I was in the back where all the trucks are, and there was this flash of light, and this huge naked dude just like popped out of nowhere, and he mentioned something about a time riot and then left. That's all I remember.
Oh,
was
Pope
it Lord
Greg.
Chesterfield?
No, it's Pope Greg. That guy is yoked. Pope Greg was all about working out. He's the event. P90X is the exercise regimen created by Pope Gregory. And what else was Pope Greg responsible for? I don't know. It just feels more approachable to call him Greg. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Early on to this episode, I slightly boneheadedly dropped, it's the Gregorians. And there were Gregorians, the monks, with the chant. And they were followers of a Pope Greg, just not this Pope Greg.
Yeah, they like the first Pope Greg, but maybe it's because they hadn't heard about Greg 13. You know what I mean? Greg 13 also, I'm thinking of Ben 10. That's a different thing. Okay,
yeah, the laser watch time control device.
He was a time control guy too?
I think that's right.
They're everywhere. So Matt, a nude, absolutely ripped guy appears in a flash of light at the truck stop.
Yeah, there's a big circle like that was cut out of the asphalt where he
popped
in.
I see. It's a Terminator kind of situation.
I think so.
So you made it out, right?
Yeah.
Only fate is what we make.
Mm-hmm. He needed my clothes and my sunglasses.
I mean, you get in situations.
Give me your clothes.
This is so silly. I'm sorry, guys. But no, Ben, I hadn't heard about this. And honestly, this feels like an extremely obscure thing because it doesn't pop out in any of the history books that I remember reading.
That's weird that you say that because I have heard and seen this story before reported with a lot of certitude. Like, England's so crazy. They had a lot of riots, but did you hear about this one? You may have heard it, but the truth of the matter is, as far as we can tell, the story of the 1752 riots is more likely than not a work of fiction. Or at the very least, it's been so crazily embellished over time that it's now on the level of like a Lifetime movie that's, quote, inspired by a true story or something, one of those pseudo documentaries on Netflix. I said it. Because it all goes down to sources. Like you pointed out, Matt, believe it or not, fellow conspiracy realists, all of the claims about these riots are based on two sources. One of the, well, 2.5. One of them is a painting and an engraving, and the other is, kid you not, a 1700s version of Mad Magazine.
Wait, like
what
okay, so an equivalent.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, got it.
Alfred Newman, Matt, you put it beautifully off air when you said, man, what's going to happen when future historians find the onion?
Oh yeah, like I guess it would be a paper version of the onion, I don't know, or maybe just in an old digital archive somewhere. They
will be perplexed.
Yeah, like what in the hell was going on here? It was a weird society.
And depending, more and more stuff from the onion is becoming true, just like The Simpsons. But yeah, let's talk about a satirical source. So this is treated,
which makes it even harder to parse because they'll be like, oh, this seems kind of right. Based on other data that we've uncovered, these comical headlines don't seem that comical.
They corroborate.
Like on point.
Yeah, they corroborate.
Exactly.
So this satirical journal called The World was written by none other than Lord Chesterfield himself. That's right, the same guy who introduced the bill.
Fancied himself a bit of a fabulist, did he?
Fancied himself a bit of a fabulist. He would later write to his son, and this excerpt is often also presented as evidence about the riots. But I think if we do a read of it, we can see how that's a little off the mark.
Every numerous assembly is a mob. Let the individuals who compose it be what they will. Mere sense is never to be talked to a mob. Their passions, their sentiments, their senses, and their seeming interests alone are to be applied to. Understanding, have they collectively? None.
So the mob doesn't have any senses.
Yeah. Let's parse this out. They have no understanding. They are inflamed by passion and can't be reasoned with. Mere sense is not to be talked to a mob. No one won't listen to reason or sense. Then he kind of describes what a mob is. Every numerous assembly is a mob. He doesn't really give a number, a cutoff. What doth a mob create? And then, let the individuals who compose it be what they... So, it's a hive mind at this point. Individuals' opinions and attitudes go out the window because everyone just joins the hive mind.
It makes me question like this, because this is something that Lord Chesterfield wrote to his son. This is not Inside the World publication.
This is presented as kind of secondary evidence, but really what I can find is only the idea of a mob mentality in general. It doesn't seem as though he is specifically alluding to some kind of mob or riot around 1752. So you have to be careful when you see this stuff kind of trotted out like a quotation that supports the argument.
Right. Like taking a part out of a bad movie review that makes it seem not that bad.
Yeah.
And displaying it, out of context. So wait, this guy wrote a journal and called it The World?
Yeah, he's a very humble dude. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically he's like writing a satirical magazine, but it's really just his journal. Yeah, to me, this is more conceptual. He's talking about just kind of broad strokes what a mob is, what a mob mentality is. He isn't referring to anything in particular unless there's other stuff that we don't have.
That's what I'm saying. He's talking about mob mentality that could be applied. That's what I mean when I say he's talking about mob mentality that could be applied to Parliament as easily as it could to the streets of London.
Guys, I think it should be noted, we're looking at Britannica, where they've got an article titled, "Did a Calendar Change Cause Riots in England?" And in it, they have an excerpt from The World that is supposedly referring to these time riots. But if you read it, and I recommend you do read it because it's kind of, if we said it out loud to you, it might be very hard to parse through. It appears to just mention that people were upset about this change. It doesn't seem to mention anything about a riot. There's a quote that says, "Making no doubt that fires would be kindled again in Smithfield before the conclusion of the year."
Fires, like, is this metaphorical?
Yeah,
Not talking about actual fire.
Well,
That's what I mean. I read that and my mind immediately goes to they're talking about, people there rioting and setting things on fire. But I think they're talking about like the fires of some sentiment being rekindled.
Yeah, I have that quote later in the notes because it's sort of a vague threat. Before we get to that one, let's talk a little bit about that second piece of evidence. And this is where people got misled pretty often. There is a painting and an engraving based on the painting called An Election Entertainment, made by a guy named William Hogarth in 1755. William Hogarth, very talented, is kind of like a New York Times cartoonist for his day. And his painting is often touted as, you can find it easily, just Hogarth Election Entertainment, Hogarth. His painting is often called as like a depiction of maybe the aftermath of the riots or things leading to the riots. The idea is people are giving depositions or accounts of what went down. But the trouble is, that's not what the painting is about. It's based on a number of arguments that Parliament had one day, and they talked about a bunch of different issues. One of them happened to be the calendar, and there's no other contemporary evidence that it happened. Think about how well documented so much other stuff was in England in the 1700s comparatively.
Oh, yeah. Right? Those English are pedantic. They wrote down everything.
So if there never was a riot, how did what appear to be extremely niche political jokes, Daily Show kind of things become fact? Some of it is all in the way these things are interpreted. I like that you mentioned Britannica as well, because up until at least 1976, the Encyclopedia Britannica was reporting these riots as fact. So you can't really blame people for believing the story. I mean, for Pete's sake or Greg's sake, it shows up in an encyclopedia.
But was there a political agenda or purpose in proliferating these kind of overblown claims, like on one side of the divide or other? Like, there were riots. Therefore, the working class are trash. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, was there a reason that maybe this was circulated, perhaps by the powers that be, to cast in a bad light, the folks who disagreed with them?
Yeah, it's a good question. It seems like maybe some things were just lost in translation over time, because even Yale professors were circulating this, particularly Ronald Paulson. In 1993, he published a book all about Hogarth, and he kind of captions this infamous painting by saying that it is about the Oxfordshire people rioting to preserve the 11 days the government stole from them by changing the calendar. But regardless, we know people really weren't happy. We outlined the real reasons they weren't happy. And there are weird threats made on record. There are like threats of riots, but I would say they're severely British stuff. No offense to our friends across the pond, or severely posh British stuff. There's stuff like you had mentioned earlier, Matt, fires would be kindled again in Smithfield. That is a reference to a London market space that was known for being the scene of a popular uprising in the medieval era. So there were definitely Tories who were like threatening that something bad was going to happen. Maybe they would assemble some folks, but it didn't really seem to happen. People blamed the Jewish community, they blamed the Catholic Church, and they did not try to overthrow the government. I got to ask, I mean, wouldn't there be more evidence if those riots really happened?
Yeah, yes, there would.
I'm tempted to say so too. I mean, this is what we see. 3 conspiracies at play. The first one is a lovable accidental conspiracy. The best of intentions, people corroborated his story, turning myth into fact. Second, I would argue, moving the calendar is for sure a conspiracy. Pope Greg, like we pointed out, he didn't take some public poll. He didn't tally the results. He didn't say, what days are good for you to lose?
Right. Yeah. That's why they pay him the big bucks. Got to make the hard calls. If we could backtrack to that a little bit, what was his ultimate gain here, or the gain of the, him and his cronies?
Greg or Chester?
Yeah, just for this whole like calendar surgery.
It makes religious occasions and events in Catholicism jibe with where they're supposed to be seasonally. Like Matt
It makes them more prominent. It makes them like signposts and more markers of time.
Like Easter needs to be in spring, like Matt pointed out, right? And Easter, again, being a big deal.
Oh, yeah. Easter's a huge deal. Guys, isn't it weird to think that we still call it October? October?
That's always bugged me.
What are you getting at?
Why isn't it the 8th month?
Yeah, that's the 8th month.
Yeah.
November, the 9th month. Guys,
wow, what about Thursday?
December is the 10th month.
You're totally right. I never thought about that.
That's a relic of this. It's an artifact.
Thought about that. And also, how come the United States is still the only place in the world that uses the imperial system of measurement?
Namibia.
Oh, okay. Well, one of. But it's speaking of standardizing, it doesn't seem like it's something that we give too many hoots about here in the States.
No. And it's a weird game to try to get people on the same page about anything. And I would say, honestly, maybe this is a good spot to end as we're all going toward the end of this year, right? Which either isn't going to happen till March, may have already happened as you're hearing this, maybe on the way, you know what I mean? Depending on which calendar you personally follow. The calendar itself, the human calendar, is kind of a conspiracy. It's one everyone participates in.
You know, Max in the chat proposed a stuff that I want you to know beefcake calendar.
Yep.
I'm all for this. Yeah, you did. I propose we take it a step further and just invent an entirely new calendar and just pitch it, to the powers that be. I think we could probably improve the current situation. What do y'all think? Yeah,
and we'll just have pictures of meat pies, various meat pies.
Yeah, that's what I meant by beefcakes. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I certainly have some feedback to the revolutionaries in France who tried their own calendar. I think they cut themselves off at the neck there, maybe. But there's definitely improvements to be made in the way civic calendars. Now, you don't want to mess with religious calendars at all. That's a whole other bag of badgers, but I bet we could do a good civic calendar because, again, it's just a conspiracy. It's just humans being great pattern recognizers, putting this sort of anthrocentric frame of reference around a series of processes on Earth and in the heavens that began long before humans were ever here and will continue long after they are gone.
And we do have, examples of different types of calendars, don't we? Like, isn't the Chinese calendar different? Doesn't it rely on like the lunar cycles more than our Gregorian calendar?
You're talking about like Lunar New Year?
Correct.
Yeah. A lot of the old calendars were based on the moon.
Check out our episode on Is the Moon Messing With Me? And that goes with religious calendars, many of which are still in use today. You can also see a related conversation in different horoscopes or zodiac systems of the world, which I find endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, modern day China does use the Gregorian calendar like us, again, for seeking up business purposes. But their religious holidays like Chinese New Year and then Lantern Festival and all of that stuff is governed by the Chinese calendar.
Which is lunisolar. So dependent on both the sun and the moon. But whatever day you want it to be, for yourself, go out there, make it that day. You know what I mean? Make it that year. We believe in you. You can do it. We've got more weird stuff coming before again, I argue, relatively arbitrary end of this calendar year. We hope that you're having a great one. And we can't wait to hear your take. Have you invented your own calendar? Love to hear it. Also, I don't know if you all saw, brightened my evening a little. Old Humorous Harry sent us another batch of puns.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And we're not touching them. No.
Why?
No, Harry. We're going to save them. Yeah.
We're saving them. To let, like Rocky Horror Picture Show taught us, it's all about anticipation.
Antissa what?
So we'll answer that question in an upcoming episode. In the meantime, we can't wait to hear from you. We try to be easy to find online: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. You know the hits. Come say hi.
This is true. You can find us in all those places that they handle conspiracy stuff. On Instagram, we've been little rascals and changed it up slightly to Conspiracy Stuff Show. Lots of fun stuff popping off on Instagram these days.
Oh, for
Not like
sure.
in general, specifically our Instagram. So do check it out.
Yes, yes, yes. Hey, and we also have a phone number. Give us a call. It is 1-833-STDWYTK. When you call in, give yourself a cool nickname. You've got 3 minutes. Say whatever you want. Just please, at some point in that message, let us know if we can use your name and voice on one of our listener mail episodes. If you don't want to use your phone, why not instead send us an email? We are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.